Is it pure ignorance or just plain deception? Sony has once again done a song and dance for consumers and fans alike, convincing them that something was only possible on the PS5, and now it has come out that that is going to be a totally different story, and now Sony is trying to even cover it up. Let's discuss it right now. So here we are once again with a PlayStation exclusive game being ported over to PC, and it seems to be continuing a plaguing narrative for PlayStation games on PC, which has a lot of Xbox fans laughing and PC gamers shaking their heads, feeling like either PlayStation is trying to somehow convince the world that the best place to play an exclusive is on the PlayStation console because of some convoluted idea that the tech is better over there, or is it just because of plain ignorance on getting a PC port of a game to work on PC because PlayStation has no real experience in getting games to work on PC, which is why they've had to hire companies like Nixxes and other port companies to do it for them. So PlayStation has started crafting a narrative over their games coming out on PC. It started really with The Last of Us 1 remake port, where the game had a lot of bugs, glitches, optimization issues, and overall poor performance, which led to the game being very poorly received by the PC community and the people that were really looking forward to that game to finally come out on PC. And now it really does seem that there is going to be another controversy around another game released on the PC, which was a PlayStation exclusive. And this one was done by Nixxes with Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. It was originally developed by Naughty Dog, but Naughty Dog crafted it for the PlayStation 5 using some controversial tactics, shall we all say. We'll get to in a second. But for the overall port, Nixxes did it for them. And that is where, according to Digital Foundry, the game is visually stunning and impressive overall. But yet again, there has been some observations of lack of overall polish. And even worse, it now appears that there's an even bigger controversy coming out about how the game is able to run on a normal standard solid state, HDD hard drive. This is where Sony has gotten completely confusing in their marketing, and it has led to a lot of people just at this point having these huge debates on was it needed? Is the tech that great? Or is it by some chance just Sony trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes? Okay, the main point of contention that a lot of people are having a huge discussion on social media about, and gaming articles in general, is the fact that one of the big stipulations about Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart was made by Insomniac Games, stating that the game was only possible on the PlayStation 5 because of its amazing SSD. But as you can see right here from the specs, down all the way down on the minimum specs, it actually says that you can use the game on a standard HDD hard drive, which is in a lot of households. I mean, HDD hard drives are the more commonplace cheap hard drive that everybody has. Then you have SSDs, and then you have the NVMe SSD, which is like bolting on a nitrous oxide tank to an SSD. And I mean, I absolutely love them. That's why, honestly, the PS5 and the Xbox Series family of consoles are amazing devices because they are leveraging this newer hard drive technology and they are implementing it. But at the same time, there is things that can be done to make these games run on other hard drives without having to do some massive over-exaggerated claim that it's only possible on this kind of a hard drive. This kind of brings us back to when the founder of Traveler Tales had claimed that the Rift effects in Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart don't need the PS5 SSD to work and could easily have been accomplished on hardware from 2 generations ago. John Burton accuses Ratchet developer Insomniac of being somewhat misleading when it claimed that the portal traveling mechanic would have not been possible without the solid-state drive of the PlayStation 5. Burton makes it clear that he's not saying the PS5 is not using the SSDs the PlayStation 5's SSD loading speeds to do everything properly, but it's not true to claim these set pieces aren't possible to pull off on older hardware. He's just wanting to explain that there is pretty simple techniques that can be used to achieve exactly the same thing on older hardware. And in the article, he even went in describing what some of these techniques are, and even referred to one of, like, I believe it was a Lego Star Wars game to show how some of these techniques are implemented. And then this is where they bring up a little bit of the controversy, which is why people are kind of wondering what's going on. So in a video posted on the PlayStation YouTube channel a year before the release of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Insomniac's creative director Marcus Smith claimed the game's rift traveling mechanic was impossible on previous systems. Quoted, "Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a game that utilizes dimensions and dimensional rifts, and that would not have been possible without solid-state drive of the PlayStation 5. And not even a short time later, the claim was later dialed back somewhat after the game launched, when the game director Mike Daly told Axios, "You can make a game like the new Ratchet & Clank on the PS4, but visually speaking, you would have to dial back a ton in order to get it running." And that kind of just goes back to, again, the minimum specs here. Like if you look on the top line, of course, you're not going to be over here at 4K 60. You're going to be at 720 30. So yes, you're going to have to scale back the game. But to try to make that exaggerated claim like this is not possible except on this miraculous technology inside this box. Right. So this is where the narrative is really going to kind of flourish into this conversation of, is it possible? Is it not possible? Or is this just plain controlling the narrative of what's going on here? So let's start with Digital Foundry. They did their initial findings of the game. They described it as impressive overall and a knockout from a visual perspective, but there was some level of disappointment that overall polish isn't quite where it should be, kind of going back to that narrative of PlayStation not exactly releasing games on PC in very good states. But they also wanted people to know that the game could not run on a PlayStation 4. And that's where they've kind of already had that first little bit of narrative twist, where they stated, "You'll witness the carnage of what happens when you try to run Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart on a launch PS4 512GB HDD. Even the very low setting doesn't work, and the game eventually crashes." Now, if you didn't catch it, they said a launch PlayStation 4 HDD. And the funny part is, like, if you go back in time to 2013 and look at what that hard drive was, it wasn't the fastest hard drive out there. It wasn't meant to deliver speeds. So it's more like, okay, well, we're just going to say it doesn't run on a launch PlayStation 4 to fit a narrative. But they did put out on Twitter that with more modern HDDs, the game works okay. So right there, we're already having our first kind of stretch of the truth and exaggeration of the game wasn't possible on a launch PlayStation 4, but with the more modern hard drives that are coming out today, it would be possible on an HDD hard drive. But there is also a little bit of tech that is making that possible, even more possible. And this is one of the reasons why I think Sony was kind of so reluctant to do this, was because it's like a little bit of a Microsoft compression algorithm and a technique that Microsoft has crafted to get games like this to work on slower hard drives. So this is where I also want to point out real quick that this is how Microsoft really benefits the gaming industry. They create technology and innovation that makes gaming like this possible for people that don't have these high-end equipment, high-end consoles, high-end rigs, what have you. Microsoft has really done some creative, innovative things to make games work on slower machines, which is absolutely amazing. So, like stated over on The Verge, before you hold this up as the latest proof that the PlayStation 5's SSD was unnecessary, you should also know that there's another technological innovation at work here, Microsoft's DirectStorage, whose recent version 1.2 added the ability to buffer data from slow hard drives before passing it along to your GPU to rapidly decompress game assets. And in the blog post, Nix's port of Rift Apart claimed to be the very first game to implement DirectStorage 1.2, and the principal programmer, Alex Bartholomew, specifically suggested it's the reason you can use a traditional hard drive on the game. And then, of course, in the article, they went more and more into how they wanted to point out that an Insomniac developer said that this game was not possible on a traditional HDD hard drive. And even the author of this article said that it was a bit of an exaggeration because in September 2021, he found that he was able to get the PS5 version of the game to run on a compatible SSD that was actually pretty slow. So he proved that the game worked on an SSD back in 2021. And that's where we kind of get into the next situation of where you like, is this really controlling the narrative? Like, did PlayStation not want this game to be used on slower hard drives? They wanted it as a selling point for the PlayStation 5. Because over on PC Gamer, they stated that with DirectStorage 1.2, developers can now use the same code for HDDs as well. Although legacy HDDs previously had some level of DirectStorage support, developers just had to jump through some extra hoops to make it work. So that's where, did Insomniac not want to jump through those hoops? Did PlayStation not want those hoops to be jumped through to make it possible? Was this game completely kind of like shoehorned into being possible only on the PS5 and as a selling point for the PS5, which kind of almost feels like a manipulative deception to convince people that the PS5 is something that it is not? Now, going back to some of the bugs and optimization issues that are taking place in this whole port of Rift Apart, is now there's a little bit of another narrative that is starting to emerge with the game, that either we have a situation of there is a bug or a glitch that is causing NVMe hard drives, no matter what version you have, to all run the same, because there is more powerful NVMEs out there. And it seems that they're all seemingly running the same. So that means a high-end NVMe is running just as well as a low-end NVMe when that's not supposed to be the case. So that's where we either have a bug or a glitch that's preventing the game to work properly on all NVMEs. But that's where the other narrative is, where some are saying that potentially PlayStation has some kind of code in the game to prevent the game from running truly perfectly on high-end NVMEs. And that is where PlayStation is trying to somehow protect the image of the PlayStation 5 by doing this. And once again, creating the narrative that the PlayStation 5 is always going to be the best place to play these games, because that's the way Sony wants it to be, and they're not willing to let go of that. So now here we are finally having the conversation of, was this game possible to begin with when it first came out to run on slower hard drives? Or was it truly some next-gen piece of technology that was truly highlighting what was possible on the PlayStation 5? When I really think it was the latter, where Sony was wanting to craft a narrative that the PlayStation 5 was somehow able to magically do things that PC hardware was not, when honestly we all know that was a complete exaggeration and just nothing more than created hype for the PlayStation 5. And that's where, you know, it's kind of funny. Like I said, Xbox fans and PC fans alike are shaking their heads and laughing that Sony has to resort to using tactics like this to somehow, again, control the narrative of the brand and make it seem like the best place to be is on the PlayStation console, not PlayStation on PC or Xbox, the PlayStation console. Again, the sacred garden of the PlayStation console is the only place to truly play these games, because anywhere else they're going to just make sure that they are not running as well as they could be, and they're always going to be an afterthought when it comes to what the fans would like to see on the platform that they prefer. So everybody, I want to thank you for stopping in and checking out today's video. If you did enjoy the content, please like, subscribe, comment down below, all that fun stuff that YouTube likes to see. Really helps the channel grow. And again, just reminding you, please check out the end card on this video, explore my channel, watch my latest video, the one that came out before this one. And also, always remember that the console war is absolute dogma. Don't fall into the trap and what it creates. Just be sure to play the games that you love on the platform you prefer, no matter what anybody says. I am Centurion1307, and thank you for watching.